Hello, everyone. This morning, I've had several messages from Otherworld, and they sort of form like a visual essay. So I'm going to talk you through them and explain the points of reference that they mention so we can make a bit more sense of what they're trying to say to us. So this morning, when I woke up, Otherworld said, Merlin went mad when he saw the horrors of the world. What did he turn to? Now, if you're familiar with the story of the madness of Merlin Wicht, then you will know that it was the forest, it was nature. But if you're not, I'm going to talk you through it and take you on the visual journey that Otherworld took me on this morning. So, the earliest stories of Merlin describe him as losing his mind long after Arthur has died, when his new lord dies in similarly futile circumstances. After witnessing the horrors of the battle of, what was it called? Aftereth, in about um, 570, 573 AD, around then. Merlin's new lord, Gwendolu, was killed as he retreated, was killed, and Merlin retreated into the Caledonian forest. And much like Gwyn ap Nuith expresses in his conversation text from the Black Book of Carmarthen, it seems that many of the great men of Arthur's time, King Arthur's time, was starting to question the darker side of their warrior culture and the horrors and futility that it brought. From my personal research, I think Merlin had PTSD, because when his sister gets him brought back from the forest after this time to the Cambrian court where she's queen, the crowds, as he walks into the enclosure, her fort, the crowds cause him to panic and become mute. And again, Gwyn ap Nuith displays clear signs of survivor's guilt. And the Welsh triads describe this battle in which Gwendolyn is killed as one of the three frivolous causes of battle in the Isle of Britain. So it was notably ridiculous. And it was the second frivolous cause, because it was caused by an argument over a bird's nest. Yes. And as a result, 80,000 Cambrians, is what we currently know as sort of Cumbria in the UK, 80,000 of them were killed. And again, I've spoken about the Gododin or Gododin before. That's a book you can read. That is a narrative poem celebrating those of that tribe who were killed in a similar way, and it explains to you the culture of that time and the futility of it and the grief it caused. So at this time, Merlin, Gwyn ap Nuith, really serious figureheads of Arthurian culture, Brythonic culture, was starting to question the nature of their warrior culture. And this is what led up to the incident with Merlin going mad and retreating into the forest. So it's no wonder, really, when you understand the sort of things that were happening and the causes for the battles that they were fighting, and how many men and how many friends and brothers and fathers and sons were dying as a result. So it's no wonder that Merlin and Gwyn ap Nuith started to question the meaning of their existence to the point of breakdown. And during Merlin's time in the forest, whilst being referred to as Merlin Wilt, Merlin the Wild, because he really did return to the wild. He didn't go and live as a hermit. He he lived like a wild animal, they said. Merlin effectively retires from assisting rulers with his gifts to focus on himself and his mental health and the true meaning of existence, as part of the ecosystem of Earth, which is something that the Dryads mentioned to us in their our channeling of them the other day. And this is really reminiscent of the Vanaprastha phase of life in Hinduism as well, which literally means the way of the forest or the forest road. And it's described as the third stage of life. So the first is youth, the second is married life when you have a family and have children. And the third stage of life, the forest stage, is the spiritual stage, where you really question your existence and you learn more about your soul. So this fits really well with that phase of life that Merlin found himself in. If we're exploring what that means, when Otherworld brought it up this morning. So it's not lost on me that Merlin's choice to retreat into the forest can also represent the fading of time, the fading of the magic and the rise of the time of man. This point in Merlin's life is the ending of the times of Prythin or Prydain, as Britain was originally called by her people, and the rise of the Anglo-Saxon takeover of Britain. While the Britons were fighting amongst themselves, they were also trying to fend off attacks by the Irish from the west and also the Anglo-Saxons from the east. And once again, we find a direct conflict between our spiritual selves and the time of magic and Arthur and Merlin and the physical world of men, the physical world impinging on the folkloric and druidic times. And I think we're finding similar things happening now with, real life trying to distract from, or not distract from, because that's disingenuous, but real life really impacting people's spiritual focus and maintenance and paths. A little aside, but I think this is actually quite relevant because Otherworld bringing up Merlin and Merlin. Merlinus or Marulinus means little blackbird in Roman Latin. And it's possible, although obviously not provable, it's possible that our anglicized version of Merthin's name, Merlin, came from the Latin and not the other way round. Obviously, in Welsh, his name was Merthin, but in English now, which is obviously a Latin-based language, we call him Merlin. And Merlinus means little blackbird. And I think that's quite pertinent because the Roman occupation of Britain predates Arthurian times. Arthurian times, we believe, were around the 800s AD or CE. And Britain would have still been very Roman influenced culturally during that time when Merlin was alive. So it's quite poignant for me as well because, when my gifts first came to come to the fore, they came with a song, Blackbird by Paul McCartney's Wings. And the words of that song, the chorus of that song, it starts with blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. You were always waiting for this moment to arrive. And that really speaks to me of coming into this time we're in. I've always really loved the idea that the blackbird continues to sing even in the darkness when all the other birds are still they're asleep or they're hiding from danger. other than the owl, which is the bird of transformation, another of my favorite birds. And also, the blackbird has 200 or over 200 different calls and sounds it makes, and it's a mimic. So we once had a blackbird who lived in our garden at the other house we lived at that used to make the noise of a Clifford car alarm, which used to cause much amusement in the mornings. And we currently have a blackbird in our current house who meows like a cat, which is fantastic. Um, and I really resonate with the blackbird because it continues to sing through the darkness and adapts to its surroundings by mimicking. And I've watched them really closely over the years, and they seem to take on a community role, like a town crier, forming, informing all the other birds of the kind of news and the movement of the sun. They're like the announcer. They're like the newsreader of the birds. They're telling everyone what's going on. And they're also the first to warn other birds when danger approaches. Um, and so I really like the idea of this because they look after their own, and they they also look after all the others, and they naturally take the community under their wing, no pun intended. So Merlin's name, meaning little blackbird in Latin, I find really poignant, both personally and universally. Um, and Otherworld also today drew my attention to the asteroid Lomia. Um, before I knew where she was in the sky today. And in Lomia is a misspelling of Lamia. Now, some of you will know what a Lamia is. It's a Greek phantom, uh, uh, a Greek bogeyman, really, that was used to scare children. And sort of if they didn't behave, the Lamia would get them. This sort of mythological creature. But the story of Lamia, of who she was, is really quite sad, but also quite poignant. So I will let you know what that message from Otherworld is. So in the earliest myths, Lamia was a beautiful queen of ancient Libya who had an affair with Zeus and gave birth to his children. And upon learning of this, Zeus's wife Hera, instead of punishing Zeus, much like she punished Medusa and cursed her, robbed Lamia of her children. So it doesn't actually say whether she kidnapped them, she hid them, or whether she killed them, or she forced Lamia to kill them. It doesn't say, but the loss of her children drove Lamia insane. So again, there is this theme here of losing your mind because of circumstance, which is obviously what Otherworld are drawing our attention to. So, and as a result, and trigger warning, Lamia began hunting and devouring others' children in punishment. She went completely insane. So, either because of her anguish or her cannibalism, Lamia was transformed into like a hideous creature, a horrific creature, very much like Medusa as well. So, there's this theme here of circumstance turning us into monsters, that Otherworld are drawing our attention to, or taking us into madness. And because of this, Zeus gifted Lamia the power of prophecy and the ability to take out and reinsert her eyes, possibly because Hera had cursed her with insomnia or the inability to close her eyes. And I think there's a really important point here that Otherworld are making, where you know, we're being confronted by the horrors of the world, very much like Merlin, and we can't avoid them. We can't look away. Um, and so Lamia is not about is about not being able to get over what's happened to you, or not being able to get over what you're seeing, and not being able to unsee what you've seen. She's about happenstance turning you into the very demon that you feared. I think there's a thread there with regards to some of the things we're seeing in politics. Almost like accusation is confession. And but the ethos of Lamia warns us not to lose our minds over the horrors of the world. You know, that's her lesson. But she also represents a glamour, you know, a spell of a fake persona to the world that disappears once it's been pointed out, a bit like the emperor's new clothes. You know, once the child points and says, "Look, he's not wearing any clothes," everyone can see it. You know, obviously, if you perform magic and spells, you know what a glamour is. And this story comes from where there's a story of Apollonius and Lamia me beguiles a man and persuades her to fall in love with him and marry her. And at her own wedding, she has magicked up this glamour of this amazing castle and this huge feast. And Apollonius reveals her to be a snake woman, a bit like a Naga. And so her spell is broken and her glamour fails and fades, and her beautiful castle and feast disappear. And she flees, leaving her groom heartbroken. And so the other lesson of Lamia is to warn us to be authentic and not to pretend that we're something that we're not. And this is really interesting because Gwyn ap Nuith only a couple of days ago talked to us about owning our authenticity and not denying ourselves, to really own up to who we are if we're seen, and not to pretend that we're something other than we are, and to really step into our true selves, even if it's pointed out, and just say, yep, you know, that's who I am. And not to be ashamed of who you are when you are eventually seen, and that you will be tested when you are seen. You know, this being seen is a test of whether or not you can own it. And Lamia is mentioned in a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. Um, and the theme of this poem is about how science and cold philosophy and explanation for everything is destroying the magic of the world and the folklore. And that seems really poignant, not only in this moment in history, but also with regards to the lesson Merlin brings to us as well, because he really, when he was alive, he really stood at that point in time where the time of legend and the Druids and Arthur and these heroic figures was being eaten away at, Lamia, and destroyed by the reality of war and an invasion. And that's really where we find ourselves now, is that contrast, is that polarization between the world of spirituality and the warring world of men. So I'm going to read you the poem by Edgar Allan Poe and just see how it makes you feel. Do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? There was an awful rainbow once in heaven. We knew her woof, her texture. and now she is given in the dull catalogue of common things. Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air and the gnomed mine, unweave a rainbow as it erstwhile made, the tender person's Lamia melt into shade. So it talks about how the infiltration of reality destroys the magic. And today, asteroid 117, Lamia, is in Aquarius. And Aquarius is the bearer, the cup bearer of knowledge and emotion and unpredictability and rebelliousness and independence and progression. And there's a sense here of a surprising reveal this week that breaks someone's glamour, that we can see it for all its horror, and that might test our sanity. And almost on top of her, in the sky, is the asteroid 5, which is Asteria. And Asteria is the son of Asterius, the god of the stars, and Eos, dawn. And Asteria is associated with the constellation of Virgo, which is exactly where our eclipse, our lunar eclipse was, of the things of the unseen things last week. And asteroid Asteria is about innocence and connecting to the divine through prayer and the purity of spirituality. And both Asteria and Lamia, the horror and the spiritual, are square Uranus in Taurus, which is the symbolism of profound disruption. And that was also quite timely because the other thing Otherworld woke me with today was playing me repeatedly Like a Prayer by Madonna. And this also fits in because the lyrics to Like a Prayer by Madonna are life is a mystery, everyone must stand alone, I hear you call my name and it feels like home, talks about angels singing and feeling like flying and closing your eyes, which Lamia can't do, and in the midnight hour feeling your power. So it really hammers home this notion of the mysteries of life that Merlin brings to us and that Lamia brings to us and the poem brings to us, that we have to we're standing alone in our power, in our essence. And as these mysteries and the magic is challenged by the horrors of reality, we still have to be the ones that sing in the night, like the blackbird. And there's this theme again of having faith in the darkest hour, of being alone and yet not, of your spirit team really cheering you on, and being supported by Otherworld. But it's also important to remember that the imagery associated with this song, the video was, even though it was a song talking about prayer, or the likening things to prayer, the video was sensual, it was provocative, it was human. There again was that polarized contrast between spirituality with the cross she's wearing over her, protruding bust. There's this contrast of of provocation and spirituality, not of purity, not of perfection, but being human in your spirituality. And so, in a very roundabout way, I think today other worlds are acknowledging that our sanity will be tested by what we are faced with. But it's a valid choice if you want to retreat into the forest or pull back from seeing that. Lamia could take out her eyes, as long as that choice is authentic and right for your path and not cowardly. And you can remove yourself like Merlin from the glare of the futility of man and their wars, and not be afraid to stand in your ownership of that choice, if it's coming from your essence. And I think that the reminder of little prayer is telling us also to ask for help from Otherworld. A prayer like Sankalpa in yogic tradition is a heartfelt intention. So whisper aloud for help in the ways that you need to stay strong. Give voice to wanting a different way for humanity to live, for desiring that futility of war to stop, and ask for help from Otherworld to keep the magic alive.